Hi Brent, just a little look at your swing compared to Aaron Badley's in some key areas. Starting at P1, ball position could be slightly less further back. The ball generally gets moved back from 0 point to try and create better contact. Obviously, the more we hit down, the more we hit out, etc. Unfortunately, when the ball gets too far back, the player can start to obviously flight the ball lower than would be ideally suited to the shot being visualised, and consequently the player will then start to overtake a little bit too much to try and satisfy the type of trajectory that he wants to flight the ball on. So what I would say is, whilst having the ball back of the centre of the arc is important, with a mid-iron, so let's say a shorter mid-iron, that's a 7 or a 6 iron, we're going to position the ball 2 to 3 balls back. So 2 balls back will be pretty baseline, 3 balls back, you're going to be hitting down a little bit more, maybe hitting slightly lower launching, higher spinning, push draws, whereas having it maybe 2 balls back is more of an appropriate position for having a more inline swing with a slightly descending blow, maybe angle of attack of about 4 degrees. So 2 to 3 balls back of that 0 point, we're just a little bit too far back there, and you'll see as we come into the hitting area what that can potentially lead to, or certainly one of the things that leads to how you look at P6.5. The other thing I would like to see you do is just create an axis tilt that is slightly more neutral by pushing the pelvis forward ever so slightly. So we want to get this lower COG just a little bit more forward, so that at P1 we have a situation where we've got a very minimal amount of side bend away from the target, as again we see with Aaron Badley on the left hand side. So I love the foot flare, I really like the grip, loving a lot of the positioning at P1, but I'd just like to see the ball position a little bit less back, and I'd like to see the pelvis just a touch more forward. Both centres on top of one another, or lower centre slightly out in front, not too much. That can lead to issues further down the line. So they're the changes I would make at this stage at P1. Your move to P2 now is much better than it was. Knees changing flex more incrementally, accumulators loading more gradually. We run Aaron through to the same position. We see that Aaron's lead shoulder has a slightly more downward trajectory. Positioning of the camera could have an impact on that, but I think in the grand scheme of things, knowing what I know about your swing at this stage, it's fair to say that that lead shoulder working downwards can sometimes be an issue. That's much better than it was, however. Again, very little to worry about at this stage. There is going to be a little bit of a difference when we get to P3. I'm just going to move that on in regards to the relationship between the lead and trail arm. So we start to see now sort of the impact of that rolling aspect of the swing. See how Aaron's arm, trail arm, sits higher than his lead arm at P3, and that's because the shoulder has traced a more downward trajectory, whereas in our case the forearms are particularly level and the lead shoulder has traced a slightly more level trajectory. Now it's moving down much more than it was. There's a definite correlation between the rolling aspect, so accumulator 3 from P1 to P3, and the position of the elbows and the trajectory of the lead shoulder. So we just need a little bit more shoulder down at that point, but it is far better than it was. So little things to look for, and again maybe feels and sort of alignments when you're working in front of the mirror, for instance, or when you're filming your swing. If we can try and see the trail arm sitting ever so slightly above the lead arm at P3. The act of getting that in there is going to reduce the amount of depth that you're creating or go looking for, reduce the rolling aspect, and get the lead shoulder working a little bit more downwards as it turns. So just adding a little bit of tilt to your turn, but again, it's just another way of looking at achieving the same thing ultimately at P3. Moving on to P4. This is where I think you've made some massive improvements in regards to the overall look of your swing. Knees continue to change flex. Spine continues to extend. And we can see again that those hands want to get deeper, which is fine, it's not a problem. Deeper swings will always tend to look a little bit shorter when you look at it from face on. Hands will look a little bit lower. So we've got the butt of the handle maybe level with the eye line. Aaron's is slightly more above it. But again, lead shoulder trajectory plays a part. The more the lead shoulder works down, as in Aaron's case, shoulder working down, knees changing flex, hands working inwards and upwards, whilst maintaining a stable in as much pelvic tilt as ideally I'd like to see at this point, which again fits in with knees changing flex more, less rolling aspect, and again the trajectory of the lead shoulder. One thing that you may want to consider to help with what I've just spoken about is the sensation of where the pressure is. Now, obviously, pressure is something we feel, it's not something we necessarily see. But just playing around with different feels, the more the lead leg flexes forward during the backswing, the more the pressure will go into the front portion of the lead foot. When you read the book, there is a section in there about what they call the pouncing cat or the crushing the can, whereas in transition, you know, if you watch a player like Aaron, he's going to add pressure into the front part of the lead foot. So pressure goes into the front part of the lead foot as the linear movement kicks in. Then as we start to extend and rotate, the pressure moves into the lead heel. As the lead leg straightens, lead hip clears, and rotation continues. So the feeling of pressure under that lead foot can help you achieve a little bit more of a downward trajectory in the lead shoulder, P1 to P4. So I would be feeling like, getting you to feel like, should I say, that P1 to P4, you're applying pressure to the lead part or the front part of the lead foot, which is going to facilitate a little bit more flexing of the lead knee, a little bit more downward trajectory of the lead shoulder, which should then start to extend the spine and the neck a little bit more as well. So just things that you can play around with to add a little bit to what is already an improving golf swing. We then move to P6. We can start to see a checkpoint and an area of the swing that you need to pay particular attention to in the coming sessions. We see that Aaron's trail arm is straightened out more than we see with yourself. So what we call the back side of the triangle formed between the shoulders, the trail arm and the lead arm has expanded more. So that's accumulator 1. Accumulator 4, the left arm, has also moved quicker and more, which is creating a situation where at P6 the lead arm is pretty much parallel with the trail leg. In our case, trail arm is not parallel with the trail leg. The butt of the club is outside the trail leg, or encroaching onto the very outside of the trail leg, as opposed to more towards the centre, which means that the radius of the golf swing in Aaron's case is slightly tighter than the radius of your golf swing. So he's speeding up the arms whilst maintaining the angles in the wrist. Now, a really good way of getting a feel for this is to rehearse a few swings where you go from P4 to P6 and get the butt of the club in line with the buckle on your belt as the shaft gets parallel with the ground. You can see the impact that would have. It would move the hands forward whilst maintaining the wrist angles. It would encourage a slightly different action in that trail arm as well. It would be straightening, and it would be straightening out towards the front portion of where the ball's located rather than directly at the ball. So whilst pivoting in the downswing, we've got to control the trajectory of the hands, the radius of the swing. So that's one way of creating that. And that for me is a key point for you now. Moving forward, we've talked a little bit about the backswing, but I want to see you with a tighter radius at P6. By the time we get to about P6.5, we can see now how the angle in the back of the wrist is starting to come out a little bit quicker than we see with Aaron's. So as we get better at P6, the shaft will not recover as quick at 6.5. And at 7, which we sort of just miss on this footage, unfortunately, the shaft would be a little bit less vertical, even though that's just after 7. You see there now, Aaron's shaft is leaning forward a little bit more. The hands are more forward, the lead arm is more forward, and the right arm is thrusting more this way, whereas yours is less. So these are not definitive points, they're just little areas that you can consider. Tighten up P6. This will also start to improve. Pushing up out the ground, squeezing the elbows together, recocking the wrists. As discussed before, we don't push out the ground quite enough. We're actually starting to make a much better go of it from 6 into 7. And we just need to continue to work on stabilising the upper centre whilst the lower centre tucks under. Having said that, we've got, generally speaking, a far better action than we had a few months ago, and it's certainly moving in the right direction. The position you're in, P5, just sort of skip past that, I'm just going to touch on it. Again, Aaron, a little bit more flex in that lead knee, a little bit more pressure pushing into the front part of the lead foot than we see with yourself. So if you make the change we discussed at 4, you should find that that changes 5 and makes it a little bit easier for you to then focus on tightening that radius at P6. So main